Most people will never tell you what's really going on inside them. They smile. They nod. They laugh at the right moments. But behind the eyes, behind the posture, behind the carefully chosen words, is something else. A tension, a fear, a truth they've never spoken aloud, and maybe without realizing it, you've felt it. A friend says they're fine, but their voice trembles just enough to make you pause. A colleague compliments your work, but there's a tightness in their jaw you can't explain. A loved one seems distant, present, yet far away. Something's off, you can't name it, but your gut knows. Something is being hidden. This video isn't about mind games or manipulation. It's not about tactics or reading body language like a manual. It's about developing an ancient kind of awareness. The kind that doesn't look harder, but sees deeper. A stoic kind of seeing. Because when you quiet your mind and learn to observe without judgment, people start revealing everything without even knowing it. The eyes, the pauses, the silences between the words. They all begin to speak. What if you could sense what others don't say? Not to control them, but to understand them. Not to invade their privacy, but to honor their unspoken truth? And what if, in doing so, you became less reactive, more composed, and more connected to your own inner strength? That's what the Stoics practiced. And that's what we'll begin. Right here. The Stoic art of quiet perception. There's an old belief that Stoics were emotionless, that they walked through life like statues, unmoved by anything around them. But that's not true. The Stoics didn't ignore emotion. They studied it. They noticed it. And most of all, they refused to be controlled by it. They became master observers, not of crowds or events, but of individuals, of themselves, of others, and of the invisible threads that connect the two. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who led armies and ruled over millions, once wrote more about watching his own thoughts than conquering others. To him, clarity began not with action, but with perception, with the ability to see things as they are, not as we wish them to be. And people are full of subtle signs. The Stoics learned to read not just the content of someone's words, but the energy behind them. They noticed tone, tension, hesitation. They didn't rush to conclusions, but they didn't ignore the signals either. They let reality reveal itself, little by little. Today, in a world full of noise, that kind of attention is rare. Most of us listen to respond, watch to judge, speak to fill the silence. But a Stoic watches in stillness. They let the world show itself. They see without needing to act. And in that stillness, they see what others are trying to hide, even from themselves. So what are people around you hiding? And more importantly, are you ready to look? Not with suspicion, not with control, but with calm curiosity. With the kind of presence that doesn't just catch lies, but catches pain, longing, joy, and fear. In the chapters ahead, we'll walk through how the Stoics trained this awareness. Not to outsmart others, but to live more honestly, more clearly, more courageously. Because once you begin to see clearly, nothing stays hidden for long. Not in them, not in you. And that's where wisdom begins. Part 1. Stillness reveals more than speaking. So then, if people reveal more than they realize, the question becomes, how do you see it? How do you catch the truth slipping out from between the cracks of their performance? The answer begins with stillness, not silence. Not inaction, but stillness, of the kind the Stoics practiced. a kind of inner quiet that lets the world speak to you, a deep-rooted presence that sees what others miss. The world rushes, but truth does not. In the tales of old, there was always a quiet figure in the village, not the strongest, not the loudest, but the one people came to when they needed truth. He did not interrupt. He rarely offered advice unasked. But he saw things. He noticed when the baker's daughter wore her sleeves lower, trying to cover a bruise. He saw the way the traveling merchant hesitated before telling his price, eyes darting like a fox in the field. He heard the pause in a widow's voice before she said she was doing fine. He listened, not just with his ears, but with his entire presence. That is what stillness does. It sharpens the senses. It removes the clutter of your own opinions, your eagerness to respond, your need to be right. It lets the truth, like water through a still pond, reflect back to you without ripples. Stillness is the beginning of sight. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change. It is the truth I seek." But how can one seek truth if the mind is noisy? Most of us go into conversations already deciding what we want to find. We judge a person before they speak. We scan them for validation or threat. We listen only to craft our next reply. But the Stoic waits. He doesn't need to impress or dominate. He has nothing to prove and everything to perceive. This waiting, this watching without rushing, creates a space where truth can emerge. People sense when they are being seen, not judged, not evaluated, but truly seen. In that space, they begin to reveal themselves. Sometimes it begins with a small shift in posture, a glance downward, a sudden need to justify something they were never asked about. A flicker of emotion they try to bury. You don't call it out. You don't confront it. You simply witness it, and in that witnessing, you learn something rare. Most people don't hide because they want to deceive you. They hide because they're afraid of what would happen if they showed who they truly are. When you are still, you give them permission to be real, not always consciously, but something in them knows this person isn't a threat. This person isn't waiting to pounce. And slowly, the mask begins to loosen. Stillness is not passive. It is power under control. Think of the great rivers. The surface seems calm, but underneath there is force, direction, intention. The Stoic holds his stillness like a blade in its sheath. He doesn't use it to cut unless he must, but its presence brings peace. It tells others, this is someone who is not easily shaken, not easily fooled, not easily disturbed. And because of that, others instinctively reveal more. They stumble into their own truth in your presence, not because you pressed them, but because your quiet didn't run from discomfort. Your presence allowed it to breathe, to read people. Don't reach for their mask. Be still and watch what slips beneath it. A trembling hand when a loved one is mentioned, a forced smile after success, a subject changed too quickly. These are all whispers. If you're too busy thinking of yourself, you'll miss them. But if you are still, truly still, you'll see what most don't. You'll notice when someone's laughter carries the weight of exhaustion, when pride is covering shame, when confidence is a borrowed coat worn to hide the cold inside. And you won't need to fix them, or expose them, or tell them what you've seen. The Stoic simply honors the moment. He listens deeper, and sometimes that is the most healing thing of all. Because in a world full of noise, being still is not weakness. It is a quiet kind of wisdom. And when you cultivate it, when you learn to sit calmly in the presence of what others are too busy to notice, you'll find that people start telling you the truth, not with words, but with everything else. And you, in your quiet watchfulness, will be ready to understand. Part 2. The eyes speak what the mouth hides. And once you've quieted yourself, once you've learned to sit in stillness and simply see, you'll begin to notice something else. The words may say one thing, but the eyes speak an entirely different truth. The mouth may lie, but the eyes remember. There is an old saying whispered among quiet observers. The eyes are the last to betray you. Before the body stiffens, before the voice cracks, before the story begins to fall apart, the eyes give it away. Every time. You don't need to stare. In fact, a Stoic never invades, never forces. But when you sit with a person, truly sit, and listen without rushing, you'll begin to see it. You ask them how they've been. They smile. Good, they say. Busy, but good. And just for a second, their gaze drops, or darts, or lingers a little too long, as if they're reaching for the version of themselves they wish they could be. That pause, that flicker, that hesitation, it's not weakness. It's truth. The eyes don't perform. They reveal. Marcus Aurelius never wrote about decoding people like a puzzle. That wasn't the point, but he did speak of perception, of seeing what is without the filter of ego or assumption. And when it comes to the human soul, the eyes are the clearest mirror. There is grief that doesn't cry. There is anger that doesn't shout. There is fear that wears a steady smile. But the eyes, especially when they think no one is watching, tell a different story. They tighten when something matters too much. They widen when surprise brushes against a wound. They glaze over when the heart feels unseen. To notice these things is not to invade privacy. It is to hold presence. Presence is how the Stoic reads what is sacred. It's not about catching people in a lie. It's about recognizing when they are lost in their own mask, when their words carry a different music than their spirit does. Sometimes, the most revealing moment happens when someone looks away. They say they're over it, but they won't meet your gaze. They say it doesn't matter, but their eyes shine with disappointment. They say they're listening, but their eyes drift again and again to the door. And then there are the moments of true connection, when someone meets your eyes and there's no defense, no performance. Just honesty, raw and whole, the look of someone who isn't hiding because they finally feel safe enough not to. That is the gift of watching with wisdom. You begin to see not just deception, but depth. You notice when someone is holding back because they're afraid to be too much, or when they can't stop talking because they're afraid of being forgotten. You notice the stories that don't fit the eyes that tell them. And in that noticing, you don't have to say anything. You don't need to correct or expose. The Stoic holds space, not judgment, because when someone feels truly seen, they begin to see themselves. There's an old grim-like tale of a girl who couldn't speak, for her words had been taken by sorrow. She wandered through a forest of people, none of whom noticed her silence, until one man stopped and simply looked, not with pity, not with need, but with presence. And slowly, under his gaze, she remembered her own voice. That's the power of being still, of seeing with the eyes of the Stoic. You don't just uncover secrets, you help others uncover themselves. So watch the eyes, listen with your own, and not just in others, but in yourself. When you speak, where do your eyes go? What are you hiding? What truth flickers behind your practiced calm? For in learning to read others, we are also invited to read ourselves. And perhaps, in both acts, we begin to remember that honesty is not loud. That truth is not forced. It simply looks back at you, waiting to be met. Part 3. Speech is noise. Watch what they avoid. So if the eyes reveal what the mouth conceals, then the next lesson follows gently in its shadow. Not everything people say should be trusted. But what they don't say, that's where the real story lives. Words are often a mask. But silence is a doorway. In the old folk tales, there was always a character who talked too much, a merchant who spun golden promises, or a prince with a silver tongue. They dazzled the villagers, but the wise old woman at the edge of the forest would only listen for one thing, not the words spoken, but the ones that never came, because avoidance is not absence. It is a signal. When someone fills the air with laughter, stories, and surface-level charm, and yet swerves every time the topic grows real, you must listen there, not to the laughter, but to the swerve. What makes them change the subject? What do they rush past? What question do they answer without actually answering? Stoics are trained to watch the dance of avoidance, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is slipping, gently remind them where they are going." But do not be surprised, for we all wear a burden of blindness. Avoidance is one kind of blindness. It's not always intentional. In fact, it's often how we protect the most wounded parts of ourselves. A man may talk endlessly about work, plans, money, ambition, but grows quiet at the mention of his father. A woman may glow while describing her children, her busy schedule, her friendships, but her eyes harden at the question, "Are you happy?" They don't lie, but they do divert. And if you're still enough, gentle enough, present enough, you'll see it. Avoidance is the shadow cast by a hidden wound. And the Stoic does not chase shadows. He observes them. He lets them stretch across the room like dusk approaching the edge of a firelight, revealing the shape of something that cannot yet be spoken aloud. There is power in what people dodge because it tells you where the pain lives, where the fear hasn't yet softened, where the past is still trembling in its sleep. And once you begin to notice it, not to confront, not to corner, but simply to see, you begin to understand the person far beyond their performance. Listen for what's missing, not what's loud. Most people will repeat the same themes again and again. Success, stories of strength, carefully framed memories. But in between those polished pieces is a silence they keep patching over. Ask 100 questions, and they will answer 99. But that one they keep skipping. That's where their soul is whispering. Sometimes, even their jokes are shields. Watch how often someone turns vulnerability into humor, how they make others laugh right when their truth is about to surface. It's not manipulation. It's survival, and the Stoic doesn't tear that armor away. He honors the silence. He waits by the door they're afraid to open. You cannot rush trust, and you cannot demand authenticity. But if you stay calm, clear, unmoved by their mask, they may choose to invite you in or not, and that too must be respected. But you will have seen, you will have understood, not by what they said, but by what they avoided. And in that understanding, there is compassion, quiet, strong. Like the forest that waits patiently outside the village walls, knowing all things return to its stillness in the end. So watch the edges of speech, the places where the mind flinches. That's where the real voice lives. And if you are still enough, you'll hear it, even in silence. Part 4. Emotions betray intentions. Now that you've begun to listen through what's avoided, the next truth arrives quietly, like a breeze slipping through an open window. You see, people try to shape their words, they rehearse their stories, but emotions are harder to tame. No matter how polished the mask, emotions always leave fingerprints. There is a tale often told in quiet villages of a clever traveler who boasted of peace, of joy, of control. He spoke sweetly, smiled warmly, bowed with grace. Yet every time a child laughed too loudly or a bird startled the quiet, his hand would twitch, just once, toward his chest. They say the villagers stopped listening to his voice. They listened instead to the small betrayals of his body, the tension in his shoulders, the tremble in his jaw, the breath he held before answering. And in those things, they learned far more than his words could offer. Because emotion, no matter how deeply buried, rises like steam from a boiling pot. The Stoics knew this well. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality, and yet, even imagined suffering leaves a trail. Watch a person when they speak of something that should bring joy, but their body stiffens. Watch their face when they say they've forgiven, but bitterness flickers in their eyes like a fading ember. They may believe they are past it. They may have convinced even themselves. But emotion, when unresolved, has a way of leaking through the cracks. You don't need to judge. You don't even need to speak. Just notice. A Stoic observes without haste, without the desire to fix or label. Because what matters more than the reaction is the root beneath it. Often when people say yes, their emotion says no. When they say, "I'm not angry," their clenched teeth say otherwise. When they claim it doesn't matter, their sudden silence reveals everything. Emotion is the smoke. Intention is the fire. And if you follow the smoke with care and patience, you'll discover what someone truly wants, but doesn't feel safe enough to admit. They may want connection, but fear rejection. They may crave recognition, but were taught to hide it. They may long for peace, but are addicted to chaos because it's all they've known. And their words might protect those longings, but emotion always testifies. So you must become fluent in the subtle language of the body. Not like a magician, not like a manipulator, but like an old forest dweller watching the sky darken before the rain. He does not panic, he does not announce it, he simply prepares. When someone's tone sharpens while insisting they're fine, prepare for the storm they don't yet know they're carrying. When someone stumbles through joy too quickly, prepare for the sorrow they haven't faced. Not to fix, not to change, but to understand, because emotions do not lie. They linger, they echo, and if you are still enough, wise enough, kind enough, you'll hear them. Even beneath the laughter, even beneath the confidence, even beneath the quiet. The Stoics called this inner clarity, to see through not with suspicion, but with wisdom. It is the clarity that lets you see the child inside the adult, the ache beneath the ambition, the fear behind the fury. And when you can do that, not just for others, but also for yourself, you begin to walk the quiet road of the Stoic. The road where truth doesn't shout, it whispers, where people don't confess. They reveal through tremors, tension, and tone. So when emotion appears, don't rush past it. Sit beside it. Let it speak. For in that trembling moment, you are closer to someone's truth than they may ever say aloud. And if you can witness that without fear, without demand, you are no longer just reading them. You are honoring them. That is Stoic seeing, and it begins with the courage to listen where the mask slips. and the soul begins to show. Part 5. The truth in repetition. So once you've learned to feel the tremble beneath emotion, the next trail becomes even more subtle, yet just as revealing. It's not always in what someone hides, not even in what they express. Sometimes their truth is buried in what they repeat. For what the mouth returns to again and again, the heart has not yet released. There's an old story from the Grimm tradition, one that drifts like mist from village to village. It tells of a man who visited the town square every week. He would sit on the same bench, speak to the same 3 passers-by, and always mention the same memory: the time he was wronged in a trade deal many years ago. At first, the townsfolk thought nothing of it, but as seasons passed and his story remained unchanged, down to the very words, they began to understand. He wasn't telling them the tale. He was trying to convince himself that he'd moved on. Repetition is not always a sign of strength. Sometimes it's an echo of an unfinished conversation with the soul. A Stoic, trained in deep listening, begins to notice this. You'll hear someone talk again and again about how little they care. And yet, it is that very subject that fills their speech. They say, "I'm over it." But 2 conversations later, they return to it again. And again, they say, "It doesn't matter." And yet, they craft entire monologues trying to prove just how unmoved they are. That's when you know the wound is not gone. It has simply gone deeper. And the repetition? It's the mind's way of trying to control something the heart hasn't healed. In repetition, the unresolved becomes ritual. Seneca once wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality." But what he didn't say outright, though he surely knew, is that when the imagination is not calmed, it loops. The person begins to relive the betrayal, re-argue the debate, re-justify the decision, not for others, but for themselves. And though the words may change slightly each time, the pattern remains the same. A loop, a circle, a quiet, unconscious confession that something is stuck. The Stoic watches the pattern, not just the performance. This isn't about catching people. It's about catching the rhythm of their inner world. Just like a song plays its chorus again and again, the soul repeats what it hasn't finished singing. You'll notice this in casual conversation. A man who continually mocks ambition, but always brings up those who made it. A woman who downplays love, but always talks about people who found it. The Stoic doesn't scoff. He doesn't interrupt. He simply notices what calls for attention again and again. Repetition is the mind's way of pointing to the unprocessed. And sometimes it's not emotional pain that reveals itself. It's desire. Some people repeat what they want because they haven't yet allowed themselves to want it out loud. They talk about their dreams through other people's lives. They tell stories of what they admire, disguised as observations. They bring up the same vision, the same what if in passing, until the passing becomes a pattern. To hear this is to see someone standing at the edge of their truth, waiting for permission to cross. And that is where the Stoics' stillness becomes invitation, not through challenge, not through prodding, but simply by listening so deeply that the other person finally hears themselves. You become the mirror, the steady ground beneath their circling footsteps. You offer no solutions. You simply reflect gently. You've said that before. And sometimes, that's all it takes for them to realize they've been trying to tell themselves something important all along. So pay attention to what repeats, the jokes, the jabs, the topics that sneak back in. That is where their intention has outgrown their awareness. That is where the unconscious begins to whisper louder. And in that repetition, they are not weak. They are ripe, ready for clarity if someone is kind enough to see it. The Stoic does not rush this process. He respects it because he knows the truth. What we repeat most often is what we most need to understand. And once that understanding dawns, once the pattern is named, held, seen, the loop can soften. And something new, something real, can finally begin. Part 6. Body Language. The Stoic Censor. By now, you've followed the whisper trails through silence, emotion, and repetition. But there is one place where truth speaks with no words at all. And that is the body. The body doesn't edit, it doesn't rehearse. It simply reacts. And in that reaction, the Stoic finds one of the most reliable paths to what's real. The body moves before the mind has time to disguise. There is an old tale told in the mountain villages of a man who could not lie, not because of his tongue, but because his hands gave him away. Each time he tried to twist the truth, his fingers would twitch, his shoulders would rise. His foot would point to the door, and so he began to wear gloves and heavy robes. But even then, those who truly watched him, the quiet ones, knew. Because the body always tells the deeper story, the Stoic is one of those quiet ones, a student of movement, a reader of stillness. They do not need to speak over you to understand you. They only need to see how you hold yourself when you are unguarded. When someone enters a room, the Stoic sees where their shoulders settle, whether they lead with the chest or the chin, whether their arms are wide or wound tightly around their torso like rope. When someone speaks, the Stoic listens to the words, but watches the breath, the pacing, the gestures. And more importantly, what is held too still, what seems practiced rather than natural. The truth of a person lives in how they inhabit their own skin. Marcus Aurelius knew that control of the body often revealed control of the soul. But just as often, lack of awareness in the body revealed an inner war still raging. A person may say, "I'm fine," but their fists stay clenched beneath the table. They may claim, "I'm not afraid," but their feet shuffle backward with each step you take forward. They may laugh with their mouth, while their eyes search the room for the nearest exit. None of this is a performance. It's a signal. A sign that somewhere inside their deeper self is speaking through posture, breath, tension. And for the Stoic, these are not things to exploit. They are things to witness. The body is not a lie detector. It is a soul revealer. It shows when someone has learned to armor themselves. When they sit with arms crossed and legs tucked in, not out of defiance, but out of the habit of surviving. It shows when someone carries shame in their shoulders, hanging low like heavy winter branches. When someone walks too big for their spirit, puffed up not with pride, but protection. These patterns are not sins, they are stories, and the Stoic reads them with compassion. Reading body language is not about cleverness, it is about clarity. Seneca said, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." That includes the language of the body, perhaps especially there. Because so much of what we carry is too old for words, it lives in the spine, the jaw, the nervous flicker of the eyes. And once you begin to see it, not just occasionally, but as a way of seeing, you will understand people even when they say nothing at all. You'll know when someone feels unsafe, even while smiling. You'll feel the tension behind the praise, the retreat behind the laughter, the longing behind the stillness. You won't need to guess, you'll know, because the body never learned how to lie. It only learned how to hide. And even then, it does so imperfectly, leaving trails in the breath, in the rhythm, in the subtle shift of weight from foot to foot. The Stoic watches without intruding. Without forcing, he doesn't decode to outmaneuver, he observes to understand. He walks into a room not seeking secrets, but seeing signals. And over time, he learns that reading the body is not about interpretation. It is about presence. To understand the body, you must be grounded in your own. You must be able to feel your own jaw tighten when tension rises. Notice how your chest collapses when doubt enters. See how your own hands move when the truth becomes too much. Only then can you read another without distortion. The Stoic does not study people. He joins them in stillness. And in that stillness, the body speaks. So if you want to read someone truly, don't just hear their words. Don't just catch their tone. Watch how they carry their history. Watch how their limbs remember what the mouth has tried to forget. Watch how the body, again and again, becomes the map to the soul. And if you are gentle, if you are steady, they may let you walk beside them on that map. Not as a guide, not as a judge, but as someone who finally, quietly, sees. Part 7. Be the mirror, not the interrogator. And now, after watching the body, reading the repetitions, and listening beneath emotion, we come to perhaps the most delicate lesson of all. What do you do with what you see? Because once you begin to notice people, truly notice them, you will feel a pull. A pull to ask, to probe, to uncover. But the Stoic does not pry, he reflects. He becomes the mirror, not the interrogator. There is a tale passed down through the quiet woods of a traveler who came to a village known for its wisdom. He sought the old sage who lived at the edge of the forest, hoping to unlock secrets of the human heart. But when he arrived, the sage offered him no questions, no teachings, no advice. Instead, the sage simply listened. And the more the traveler spoke, the more he began to hear himself differently. The sage said almost nothing at all, but in his presence, the traveler wept, then laughed, then understood things he had never admitted to himself before. And that is the secret of the Stoic. He doesn't reach into others, he allows others to reach into themselves. Truth is not something we drag from people. It is something we help them recognize. When someone shares with you, especially in fragments, through hesitation, through glances, through stories wrapped in defense, it is not your job to rip the veil away. It is your job to honor the veil, to stand calmly, like a clear pond, so they can see their reflection without fear. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often, be tolerant with others, strict with yourself. The Stoic does not demand confession. He does not shine a spotlight. He becomes the stillness that invites others to step out of their own shadows, because no one wants to be exposed, but everyone longs to be understood. When you push, people retreat. When you chase, they hide. But when you witness without judgment, without needing anything from them, they begin to reveal themselves without realizing it. Not all at once, not always intentionally, but piece by piece, thread by thread, and your job is simply to be present enough to receive it. Interrogation makes people defend their walls. Reflection helps them lower them. Imagine the difference between a torch and a candle. A torch is hot, demanding, harsh. It forces light into places not ready. But a candle is gentle. It glows, it warms the room. It gives just enough light for people to step forward at their own pace. The Stoic carries no torch. He carries a quiet flame. He lights the space, and then he waits. Even silence in the presence of a calm soul can be healing. You don't need to solve their pain, or name their wound, or even understand every detail. You only need to be there without needing to change anything. That kind of presence is rare, and people feel it. Sometimes they say, "I don't know why I'm telling you this," or "I've never said this out loud before." And in those moments, you have done something sacred. You have helped someone see a part of themselves not through pressure, but through presence. Be the mirror. Not the judge, not the fixer, not the eager seeker of meaning. Let people speak until they hear themselves clearly. Let them pause until silence becomes an answer. Let them circle around what matters until they finally step into it on their own. That's what a Stoic does. He is a sanctuary, not a spotlight. A resting place, not a trap. And this too is a form of wisdom. Because if people feel safe in your presence, they will bring their truth to the surface. And you won't need to ask. You'll already be listening. Part 8. The deepest secret. So then, when you've become the mirror, when you've learned to sit without demand, to listen without invading, something strange and beautiful begins to happen. People start to reveal what they never meant to share, not because you asked the right question, not because you uncovered their defenses, but because they no longer feel the need to hide. And this, dear listener, is the deepest secret of all. People reveal themselves most fully when they feel unseen, not ignored, but unthreatened, not invisible, but safe from scrutiny. There's an old story, one that wanders the edge of firesides and dreamscapes. A woman carried a locked box everywhere she went. She told others it held nothing important. "Just old keepsakes," she'd say, but she never let it out of sight. Many tried to open it. Some asked with flattery. Others tried to steal it in the night. None succeeded. But one day, she met a man by a quiet stream who asked her nothing. He simply sat nearby, not speaking, not reaching, just skipping stones and humming a tune. She returned the next day, and the next. Still, he asked nothing. And on the fourth day, without warning, she opened the box. Not because he earned it, but because she realized he wouldn't misuse it. The Stoic creates that space. A space where the soul no longer needs armor. You see, most of us walk through life performing. We perform strength when we feel weak. We perform joy when we feel hollow. We perform certainty when we are lost. Not because we're liars, but because we've learned the world doesn't always welcome the truth. But when someone shows up who doesn't need anything from us, someone who isn't watching to assess or react, our performance slowly dissolves, and underneath it is the real story, the raw one, the human one. The secret most people carry is not one of shame or scandal. It is the secret of being afraid to be truly seen, the fear that if someone really knew what lived inside, the doubts, the contradictions, the old griefs, they would turn away. But when you, the Stoic observer, remain, when you stay quiet and calm, when you let the silence breathe and the air stay soft, that fear begins to loosen its grip. People begin to say things they didn't know they were holding. Sometimes it comes out in fragments. "I don't know why this bothers me so much. I've never said this before, but..." Or sometimes it's in a look, a pause, a breath that finally escapes after being held for years. The deepest secret isn't a sentence, it's a presence that says, "You don't have to impress me. You don't have to earn my attention. You are already enough, even with your mess. Even with your scars." That is what frees people to open. And when they do, You begin to understand the heart behind the armor, the innocence behind the anger, the longing behind the pride. You see the child within the adult, the ache beneath the achievement, the softness beneath the shield. And that moment, when a person reveals who they are without trying, without forcing, is sacred. It must be held with care, because once someone opens, they will remember how you responded. Were you gentle? Were you still? Did you meet their truth with dignity or with hunger? The Stoic offers no opinion, no fixing, no story of their own. He just listens, and in that silence, the person finds something they've rarely felt before. Relief. Relief in not being chased. Relief in not being analyzed. Relief in simply being allowed to be. So if you want to know people, truly know them. Don't seek the secret. Become the space where it reveals itself. No spotlight, no pulling. Just presence. And the deepest parts of others, their hopes, their hurts, their humanity, will rise like mist from the surface of still water. Not because you went digging for it, but because you waited, and the soul always knows when it's finally safe to come home. Let them be a page. You be the quiet reader. Now you see, to read others without them knowing is not a game. It is not a trick. It is an art of presence, of patience, of love without demand. You don't need 1,000 questions. You don't need perfect words. You only need stillness. Let them speak or stay silent. Let their gestures drift, their eyes wander, their emotions stir. Let their truths rise like mist, slow and unhurried, and you be the quiet reader, the calm witness, the clear water in which they can see themselves again. This is what the Stoics knew. This is what they practiced, not to judge, but to understand. Not to control others, but to free themselves. Because the more clearly you see the world, the less it controls you. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need to force to uncover truth. You only need to be still long enough for what's hidden to come forward. So walk slowly. Listen deeply, watch softly.